My name is David Jakes. A little bit more about that in just a second. My background does include 27 years as a public K-12 educator at the secondary level. For the past 3 years, I've been involved in the design process. For the last 2 years, I've been working with Canon Design, which is an international design firm that designs healthcare facilities as well as higher ed educational facilities and K-12 facilities. I was a member of the Third Teacher Plus team. Third Teacher Plus team was a design consultancy inside Canon that dealt with really interesting kinds of design projects associated with learning space. I'm now out on my own doing some freelancing and working with the ed tech team as the director of learning spaces. So my background and my interests now focus on organizational change, development of different kinds of learning landscapes for teaching and learning. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to focus on really exploring the normal. We'll talk about the new reality response, and we'll draw some conclusion of what it means. Okay, so this is my first provocation to you, and it's this: a plausible future can be represented by a distributed, always-on connected learning experience that occurs across place and space. Does that make sense? So as soon as we talk about no boundaries, as soon as we talk about technology, now we're talking about a condition where we can distribute learning across time and space and have people occupy different kinds of locations for learning. Okay, that's really, really important. It forms the context for what we're doing. And being connected then means focusing on being able to be engaged with resources in a lot of different ways. It means being able to connect to people, ideas, conversations, and resources. And that means a 24/7 approach. Okay? All right. And the big upshot here then is this can occur in digital spaces. So what I want to do is sort of take you through the way in which I think technology is shifting where people learn. I'm going to take you ultimately at the end to some considerations of some digital space models that will help you understand how these environments can be created. So are you familiar with this? Have you seen this before? This is our current reality. It still is today. It still is today. Would you agree with that? It's changing some, right? But if you walked into any university or any K-12, especially high school, you'd see a lot of this, rows of desks. And my question for you, how important is the physical space for learning today? It's absolutely essential, right? It is absolutely essential, and there's a lot of reasons for that we'll touch on. You cannot shy away from that, the fact that even though we've got all this technology and the technology is in the hands of learners that have used it in their entire lives, the interactions that take place between people in space are the founding and the grounding of what takes place or what's essential for learning. So we can do better than this, though. There's lots of strategies that can make this look a lot different. So the question is, will this particular space support the affordances of the technology students have in their hands? The answer to that's probably not. Okay? We've got this. Recognize this? It's your typical computer lab. One of the things I get all the time is in spatial redesign, which I work with, is that what do we do with our computer labs? All right? And because that's valuable real estate, and if everybody's got devices, do we really need them? And what I would ask you to think about is, what is a computer lab? It's students sitting in front of screens in rows. And so if you don't take the opportunity to rethink your spatial status with your physical spaces, basically when you have students sitting in rows, you don't have fewer computer labs, you have more of them. Okay? So interesting thing to think about. Also the idea of library and what that shifts to. So I'm looking at current conditions and how do we rethink current spaces to support a more digital kind of influence, a more digital kind of spatial capability, so to speak. Okay? So I think we can do better with all of this. And this is where it starts to look a little bit different, is when we have the two worlds start to merge. And when you're talking about textbooks and then devices. And so we're in a lot of places, we're still in transition in terms of how digital technologies are integrated into the learning experience. Okay? And the physical space is still more important. We'll talk about how that all works out in just a bit here. And there's another example of a high school classroom where students are sitting in rows and working with a tablet. Sort of a transition time again. Okay? All right, well, when we're talking about classrooms, I love this. This is from the Hip Hop Ed Manifesto. And what I'm going to ask you to think about is the role of the physical space and how important it still is. So the classroom remains a location of possibility. And this statement, for me, honors the timeless interactions that take place there. And that's where students are, right? And still today in today's schools, in a lot of cases, perhaps your case is causing us to think differently about things like that. But the classroom still remains a location of possibility. However, I want you to think about this. Is it a constraint? Is the notion of a classroom an actual constraint? Is it a boundary? And does the very word classroom suggest a container that has to be negotiated, especially when considering larger conditions for learning? If I ask you to describe a classroom to me, do that for me. Tell me the typical classroom right now. What pops into your mind? Because it's represented the same way all the time. When I say classroom, what pops in your mind? Just desk, chairs, blackboard, whiteboard. Pardon me? A building. Anything else?
Students in the audience.
Teacher, students is audience, teacher in the front. Now take the word studio. When I say studio, what does that simple name change engender? Cameras. Creative, lights, technology. Does it give you a different perspective than the word classroom? Yeah, pretty much everybody agrees that it does. So, when we're talking about a simple shift in how we talk about spaces when it occurs, the simple vernacular of education and spatial change, when you shift from a classroom to a studio, that's a big deal. So the first thing to consider about classrooms, and when redesigning classrooms, and I share this with everybody I talk to about this, the first step in redesigning classrooms is to discard the notion that it has to be a classroom, okay? The first notion in redesigning classrooms is to discard the notion that it has to be a classroom. In other words, shift the mindset. So that's a really important question. That's where I used to work, that's Canon Design. And when you look at that particular space, you see a lot of workplace strategy embedded in that. There's a hoteling feature and things like that. All right, so the new boundary here is the new question here, the new reality is what's pushing on boundaries. All right, so here's the first thing. And the next set of images are all sort of show the same pattern or trend. And I'm really intrigued by this in the next couple images. This is, anybody recognize this? This is the Divvy bike system. So you can rent, in Chicago, I'm from Chicago, and you can rent bikes for a half an hour. The reason for that is because you can go anywhere pretty much in a half an hour. And if you're gonna go farther than a half hour, you probably need to take a cab, right? So you can rent bikes for 30 minutes. You can rent zip cars for a couple hours. What's the connection between those two things? Third question, third idea. Airbnb, you can rent someone else's home, right? And then this particular question is, this is the Next Door Cafe in Diversey Parkway in Chicago. You can rent a space to work in. And by the way, this space is, you have to be there by 8 o'clock on the weekends or you won't get in. It's a terrific co-working space. It's run by State Farm Insurance. Yeah, well, you're going, why would State Farm Insurance do a co-working space? Because they sell insurance policies and retirement plans to 20-year-olds, right? So what do? You build a space that collects your clients. There he just happens to be an agent in the corner. So really a brilliant idea of a physical space. So what do all those have in common? All four of those, the bikes, the cars. Yes, they are shared resources, okay? It's about access to resources when you need them and not ownership of resources. It's called the sharing economy, right? So the interesting thing that emerges is how does that play into the idea of an education, either at the higher ed level or the secondary level, in terms of having things on demand when learners need access to them. And so digital spaces can do a lot for that. Digital spaces can be the venue, the portal, the avenue, the location for that. And so people are, when you're looking at students coming into, we're going to talk again, I'll give you some examples of this, but students coming into higher ed right now have grown up with this, right? It's an expectation. All right. So this is the next kind of space, and moving away from that co-working space to a more formal kind of startup kind of thing. entrepreneurial place. This is 1871 in Chicago. This is in the Merchandise Mart, and Merchandise Mart is right on the banks of the Chicago River. It's a huge, huge space. And this is simply a place where, oops, I forgot the slide. This is certainly a place where you have access to a wide variety of different interests and disciplines, okay, and resources and capability and people. So the physical space, as digital spaces are changing, so is the physical space. The question is, are physical spaces inside schools and universities, are they changing to keep pace with contemporary kinds of spaces outside the typical expectation of what a school or university space might be? So there's a lot of challenges, a lot of provocations to what space can look like and how it's used. This is a terrific space. There's an incubator in there. And you can apply for your startup to be part of the incubating process. They take 10 businesses a year, and they take people or a business through the first year of business. And I love that idea about innovation and ideas for education. And I wonder where the educational incubators are in our universities and our schools. Because I think there's a great need for taking the ideas of professors, the ideas of teachers, and incubating them, making them something unique and something that changes things for students. So we've got that. We've got things like this. We've also got this, and that shifts into, the higher ed market is interesting to watch and see what's happening. This is the Lasan Studio at the Lasan Studios at the University of Utah. And what is that? Anybody want to take a guess? This is yes, it is a dorm. This is designed by the Yazdani Studio, Canon Design. It is a dorm. It doesn't look like a dorm that I ever lived in, okay? And when you walk in to this physical space, you see this. It's the first floor is 20,000 square feet of makerspace, okay? It's that creative potential. And if you are going to follow an entrepreneurial life cycle, you might want to go to the University of Utah and apply to live in this particular space because that is an invitation into an experience. So the physical space offers an invitation in. As designers of spaces, we often talk about the threshold experience. When you walk into a space, what does the space communicate? And so when you walk into this space, it's all about creativity, it's all about making. You have to apply to get in. It's under steel right now, it's under construction, so it's gonna be open next year. And the University of Utah, bravo for them, they want to be the higher ed location where you go if you want to be an entrepreneur. But what's even more intriguing is when you go up the floors, you see this, okay? There's maker spaces further up. So you don't only just go there, you live there. You live in that creative potential. And of course, there's a lot of digital tools in here. We've got to have to remember that digital tools are just not online things. What's really neat about this is that in this particular experience, you can live in 3 different ways in this. You can live with another person in a room, you can live with 3 others in a quad, or you can live here. You can live in a pod. And you can push that pod around the makerspace floor. That's brilliant. That's innovative, creative thinking. That's saying, how can we take space and reshape an experience, space and shape? We're going to give people a different kind of option to live and work in. How many of you would live in the pod? You push that over by the lathe and listen to your lathe go all night, right? How many 18-year-olds want to live in the pod? Okay. Yeah, you're not going to be able to get into the pods, I think. So this is the kinds of things that are disruptive and changing things. We've got all this technology. I don't need to talk about that. You're all familiar with that. But this enters into the game, along with different thinking about how physical space can reshape and support digital experiences. You have all the devices that serve as the conduit into it. And so you've got online tools like Google Apps for Education, Microsoft 365, provide that on-demand kind of access to creative potential. And now you have this, the virtual reality stuff, which I think in a lot of ways is really gonna blow up on us. Up on top, you have Oculus Rift, familiar? Okay. The handhelds, lower left is Bluebeam technology. Have you ever seen Bluebeam technology? Boy, if you're interested, this is location aware software and hardware. So those discs, let's say you have in your library, you have a career section, and you have a career workshop on Wednesday. And a student that's walking in with the Bluebeam app on their cell phone walks into the career section. That little disc recognizes that somebody with the app just walked into my section, and what does the disc push out to them? The notification of the workshop on careers. Okay? So what's cool about that is now the space becomes communicative. The space becomes intelligent and smart and can communicate with users. That's an intersection of a digital and physical kind of condition. I think it's what we might call a virtual experience. Have you seen, in the lower right, have you seen Erasmus? Are you familiar with Erasmus? Okay, I'm gonna have to come over here to get some light. This is your typical $20 bill, US $20 bill. This is a great trick if you're giving a presentation. You don't have any money. You have to borrow $20 from somebody. All right, bad joke, sorry. I'm trying to recover from my earlier comment. So what I'm going to do, this is I'm just pull the app up here and make sure my sound's up. Okay, this is a target image. The app sees the target image and plays an overlay. An overlay is content. The image, the target image and the overlay together are called an aura. Okay, so what I'm going to do, and I need to do this under light, so I'm going to do this and see if I can get it to work. Fireworks are coming up. So happy that worked. It's called Erasmus. Okay, so I can teach you how to build one of those in about 3 minutes. It's not really difficult. Any recognizable surface becomes a portal for the display of information. I can't do it against that wall because it's too homogeneous, but if I had I could do that exit sign, right? Or I could do something else like the top of that Panasonic. And so where it comes into play, at least in K-12, when you get some old textbooks and you got that image in that textbook kids don't understand, or that graph, you take a selfie video of it explaining it, you link the image with the selfie video of you explaining it, the kids roll their cell phone over it, you pop up and explain the image out of their textbook to them. That's really cool kind of application. So that's me interacting digitally in a physical space, having the combination. I think it's sort of a virtual kind of experience, and that's what that is, and that's what's pushing all of this. Well, it's not going to get any better than that. Thanks for coming today. I appreciate it. A-U-R-A-S, here. It's Erasmus. It's A-U-R-S-A-M-A or something like that. I can't see that, sorry. It's too small. Yeah, it is. It's a purple A. I'm going to spell it for I'm going to get my glasses and not screw this one up. It's A-U-R-A-S-M-A, Erasmus. And there's a bunch of those, but that one's my favorite. You can do some really cool things with that. It's all free, too. Okay? So we've got all these things that are pushing. We've got Minecraft. Are you familiar with Minecraft? See kids and students. This becomes a design environment. Okay? And especially in secondary education, when is this going to become something that is a valid kind of tool for kids constructing their knowledge and understanding? So all these things are pushing where spaces are going. This is this is University of Central Florida. This is teacher preparation and education, where you're actually interacting with avatars. So you're learning classroom management strategies for high school kids, and there's those avatars. Those are actually connected to real people. The real people act out in the background, and you get to go ahead and interact with them. But you can do it where? You don't have to be in a physical location to do that. You can be sitting in your bedroom doing it, okay? All right, so here's the new reality. It's on-demand access to resources across a wider range of place and space. What's the difference between place and space? School is a place, classroom is a space, right? Where students access these capabilities according to their needs and in different ways. And so as an educational institution, we're a corporate America. How do you support that condition? Because that's really the challenge. Okay, it's no longer being tethered to time and space. It's anything but. Okay? So I really like this quote. This is from Richard from Halverson from the University of Wisconsin. And to expand on that idea, he will say that students today, when you're talking about learning, have two kinds of media channels. One, an institutional channel. That's you if you're in higher education. And then this unregulated, peer-driven, interest-driven, unregulated media channel. That's everything else. So that forms sort of the initial construct of what a digital spaces might look like. One, you have spaces that are guaranteed by an institution. So you've got physical spaces, and you've got now growing digital spaces that provide a unique place for learning that interacts with the physical space, but serves as its own learning space in its own right. Okay, it's not something that's just supportive of physical space. You can do that, but it can exist on its own as a valid learning place. So those are the two kinds of things I think that, and the reason I like that is because I think it captures it very nicely, what the institution has and then everything else that students use. So when you design, though, it's understanding that. When you design digital spaces for learning, it's about understanding the way in which students work today. And so let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. Let's talk about the students that walk into a higher ed university their freshman year. This comes from the Beloit Mindset. Have you seen this? Or the Mindset list from Beloit College? Every year, Beloit College in Wisconsin pushes out or publishes something called the Mindset list, and it's what the incoming freshmen have never done. Okay? Are you ready? Okay. So incoming freshmen, this year, Hong Kong has never existed except under Chinese rule. Okay, remember when it was under British, right? Every single moment from potty training to their current moment in life has been recorded by their parents on video. Okay. Google has never not existed. And this is my favorite one. Yeah, believe it, Google's never not existed. This is my favorite one. They've never, ever had the opportunity to lick a stamp. They missed out, didn't they? Yeah, okay. So what's happening is that there are those students coming in with expectations and experiences that suggest that we need to think about how digital spaces influence their learning. So here's what it is. Technology now creates a world where there's perpetual beta. Okay, it's always shifting, always in constant demand, and looks different from day to day. It is literally unlimited and a boundless condition for learning, and the end result of that is that there are opportunities to shift what learning looks like, okay? So we've got this landscape that constantly shifts, and you have to get comfortable with living in perpetual beta. Google never tells you that their tools are changing, okay? You can find it if you look hard enough, but one day you get up and they're different, okay? All right, so here's the response, the emergence of a digital location for learning. And here's some interesting things to ponder and consider as we talk about how we've got this current reality, we've got these forces and these things that are shifting and pushing on us and pushing on boundaries and breaking down boundaries. So here's the first idea. So the question is which direction do you want to go in? Do you want to go in and make things better and things that you've already done, or do you want to create something brand new? All right. How about this? We're talking digital. No joke, North Carolina rolls out online physical education classes. That would be perfect for me. Be perfect for me. When you first saw this, what was your response? It's like online physical education, how can you do that, right? You just viewed that statement through a traditional mindset and lens. The question is think beyond that. And so what would happen if a student worked with a personal trainer for 6 weeks? And worked with that personal trainer for an hour every day and had a plan and developed that plan and recorded what they did on video and had some way to document what they were doing. You've got Fitbits on, right? Okay? So does this become something that's viable? Better believe it does. And so this emergence of personally owned technology and distributed kind of experience now changes the game and changes the way in which we have to think about what education actually looks like. The first thing you got to do is be careful you don't jump into evaluating these experiences with your current mindset. Okay? Second thing, Illinois law can make snow days a thing of the past. I'm from Illinois. We've got snow days. We've got more cold days than we do now have snow days. 30 below, you can't put kids on the street corner. And so why are they doing this? Why is Illinois jumping into online learning in snow days? So they don't lose, schools don't have to make up days, right? And they don't lose their state funding for seat time. I don't know how I feel about that. I think that's not the right focus. I think online learning can stand on its own. It doesn't need a snow day to support it. But I don't care how it starts happening. Let's get it going and seeing what it will eventually become. How about this? Harvard launches virtual classroom for students anywhere. Have you seen this? What's it look like? Looks like what? A teacher in a space and students watching that teacher and interacting with that teacher. It's basically a virtual lecture hall in my mind. If it looks like, is this better? The question is this better? And don't jump into it. I mean, is this pushing the boundaries of what technology can do? Or is it simply a replacement of a current kind of experience? Or, if it is, does it give students that couldn't connect a way to experience a Harvard experience when they couldn't? That alone makes it worthwhile, right? Again, it's not where it's at right now, but what it potentially could become. So this is another really cool thing. What do you notice in terms of the interface? What's the interface? It is in Pinterest, but it's MIT Opencourseware. And do you know about MIT Opencourseware? You can take courses from MIT. You're not going to get formal credit, but you're going to get some kind of documentation that means that you successfully completed that course. Good thing, bad thing? That's a good thing. What happens when I have classes from the University of Illinois, Chicago, the University of Chicago, Northwestern, Harvard, Stanford, Yale? What if I'm able to assemble 30 courses from different universities like that and be able to actually say I've got this kind of documentation? When does that become the equivalent of a college degree? Or does it? Being able to successfully negotiate those courses and prove that you've done that and are capable of it shows a level of certain competence. The question is when does that become something that's acceptable for employment or for stepping forward in a work career and so on? Welcome to the new course catalog. MIT's in Pinterest, right? That's pretty disruptive. That's pretty different. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the first ones, the first version of these things were not, where you just saw you got the course content and so on, but they've become much more savvy and interactive. It's a great question. So this is what you've got. You've got, these are the emerging kinds of models out there. You've got flipped learning. Are you familiar with flipped learning? You think flipped learning a good thing? Flipped learning is this. I want to, how much time I have here? That goes fast. Flipped learning is, for example, I taught cell division, mitosis, and a freshman, a 14-year-old in high school, could understand cell division without me having to lecture to them. So what I could do is make a video of myself lecturing to them, right? And they could watch that at home and process that content. They're capable cognitively of doing that at 14. And so the next day when I come back in, I don't have to talk about that because I'm already assuming that they know that. I can do some debriefing and some questions, but I'm using that time face-to-face in a different type of more in-depth kind of cognitive activity than just lecturing and having them listen. The problem is when you ask kids, certainly at the secondary level, what's the worst thing that they like to do? Is they don't like to listen to lectures. So you got to be careful that you're packaging up the thing that they don't like doing the most and sending it home as homework, okay? But the goal of this is to say, how might we shift what we do in the physical spaces and take advantages of the affordances of digital spaces to help us with that? Again, broadening the context of where and when kids can learn. Again, it's not where it's at now, but where it can potentially go. You've got blended learning conditions where students can, and there's lots of different models of this, but where students can take courses partially face-to-face and partially online. In a high school setting, when high schools do that, where do students end up showing up? Where do they take those courses that they have an online requirement? Even though they can go to Starbucks or take it online at night, where do they go to show up to do these? They go to school to do them. Because that's where they like, that's where friends are, right? So you've got online learning. What's happening with online learning in higher ed in terms of the perspectives of higher education and what value it places on the role that online learning will have in their schools. 65% of universities say that that's important for our future. Only 65, and it's declining. Okay? And part of the reason is because it's experience with massive open online courses, MOOCs, where you have 160 people in space, not been successful for obvious reasons, right? There's no centering location, and that's where, and then the original work that was done up in Canada, when they put people in a distributed ecology of spaces of learning where you can pick and choose your spaces and the people you interacted with, they found that people got lost, and they sort of longed for that centering location. So what they did is they built in a centering location, a digital centering location in Moodle, which is a course management system. So here's the models for you. In the time I have left with you, this is what a lot of spaces look like. You've got physical spaces, digital spaces. They're separate. The devices are out there. Okay? But I think this is a better model. Okay? We start to see a dedicated digital space, or I'm sorry, a physical space is up there, and then two kinds of digital spaces. One digital space that might be for professors and for teachers, right here, and then a digital space that might be on the domain of students. These are the kinds of things that are institutional based. So we have guaranteed dedicated digital spaces that the university or school provides. And they're separated into teacher and student, and professor and student. I think it's okay to separate those. For example, this might be on the digital side for teachers, it might be a learning management system where professors or teachers design in that particular space and kids step in and work in it, but then they have their own opportunities. The university may provide Google Apps for education, and that's a design environment for students. Okay, so it might look like that. The device serves as the conduit between the two. But what I really like is this, is where we take those three formal spaces, the physical and the two digital, and wrap around an informal digital space. And in the Google world, this might be Google Plus or some kind of informal environment. And what happens is now, especially in the secondary condition, the opportunity to design an institutional-based space that's moderated and that it's safe is a big deal. And this is where kids can actually talk about things outside of school, outside of the academic nature of school. It's not something that's necessarily part of the curriculum, but it's something that is certainly part of the mission of schools. So what I really like is this idea of knowledge commons, because everybody that's part of that institution has some expertise, has something to share. Doesn't necessarily have to be related to any one particular course they're in, okay? But this informal space enlarges the boundaries of where people can interact beyond the container of course in institutions. And then I like the idea that this is something that is semi-permeable, okay, and allows for flow of information, ideas, and resources and people into it, okay? And I love the idea of the content that flows out or things that people create that flow out of that ecology. So one of the ways to look at this is in the ecology of space, a model for how physical and digital spaces can work together and integrate together. I think it's really important to remember that digital spaces and physical spaces should not be separate. They should be things that talk to each other. They should inform practice. One should inform practice of one, should inform practice in the other. And that there's an opportunity to engage in a lot of different ways through this space, okay? All right, so here's some upshots. Here's some conclusions from this. And I've got 5 minutes, okay. So, first idea here, expansive conditions for learning shaped by technology suggests that there's a broader experience possible. Do you believe that? Think about the notion of what that means and the fact that typically education took place in physical spaces. Now you've got physical spaces that can look in a variety of ways and can provide different kinds of experiences, much more broader concept, much more expansive condition for learning. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. Where that comes into play then is what does campus become? And how does that reshape the notion of campus? Because the campus used to be a certain amount of real estate. Now the campus can potentially be infinite. And think about the interactions that take place in campus now. They can be physical, can they be digital, and they can be virtual now. And how does that reshape the perspectives on what can happen for learning when we have more expansive conditions for it? okay? And we have opportunities to craft and create spaces and experiences that are much broader in context. A lot of this is disruptive, as you might imagine, okay? So, upshot is, what does learning look like in that ecology? And think about all the different kinds of experiences. I talked to somebody at the lunch table I was eating at, and they record all their lectures in media site, and no one's showing up for the lectures. Good thing, bad thing. Might say a little bit about how kids want to work, or students want to work, and the power of lectures, I guess, today. In any case, what happens to this new spatial ecology, and how does it manifest across the new spaces of what's considered campus? Number 4 here, those models I just showed you, and I'm still working on those. I still have a long way to go with those. I don't think they're in final form. I think because we're in such a beta landscape with technology, that the notion of what digital spaces could look like are constantly shifting. What they'll be like in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years will be completely different than we look like today. But you have to become comfortable with a new lens, a new mindset that allows you to rethink and reshape those kinds of spaces. We've heard a number of times throughout the day of flexibility and agility, and how spaces need to reflect that. And that's also true of a mindset. That's also true of the kinds of spaces and the way in which we should look at learning, is that how we provide learning and the conditions for learning have to be now infinitely flexible and agile, and take advantage of the tools that allow us to create that. And so the final thing here I have for you is the upshot is the NEs. And one good thing to take away from this is that learning now can be anywhere, with anyone, at any time, using any device, following any kind of path of your own choosing. And so the NEs are, I think, if you're to look at the design of learning spaces, whether it's physical or digital or a blended ecology of both, and the kinds of learning that takes place, these can be exceptional drivers for setting up a design environment that says, we need learning to look like this. I'm just working with a client earlier today, and they're reshaping 2 big library spaces in the learning commons, and they're not talking about what learning looks like. They're talking about things. They're talking about furniture. They're talking about computers. Don't make that mistake. When you're thinking about digital technologies, when you're thinking about learning spaces, physical and digital, focus on the student, focus on the experience first, and then focus on the new kind of context described by those in terms of how you might construct meaningful places for students to learn in. So thank you very much. Appreciate that. Appreciate your time. Thanks.